In the quiet town of Gray, France, fear spread like wildfire when a young woman vanished during her morning jog. Days later, her body was found in the woods, burned, hidden, and brutally strangled. The community mourned, and her entire family was drowned in grief. But what no one knew was that the very man crying for justice was the one who had committed the crime. This is not just a murder. It is one of the most twisted cover-ups France has ever seen. The case of Alexia Daval. Her name was Alexia Daval. Born in 1988, Alexia grew up in a well-respected family. Her mother, Isabelle, was active in the city council, known for her dedication to civic life, while her father, Jean-Pierre, owned a local cafe that doubled as a hub for sports enthusiasts. Together, they raised two daughters, Stephanie, the eldest, and Alexia, the youngest. The sisters were close, their bond reinforced by family values of loyalty, hard work, and integrity. Alexia, by all accounts, was energetic, driven, and dependable. She carried herself with a vibrant energy that made people naturally gravitate toward her. Yet, she was grounded in responsibility and discipline. Friends and family admired her determination, seeing her as someone who embodied persistence and resilience, a young woman with both ambition and warmth. Years earlier, she had met Jonathan Daval, a quiet, introverted man from a large family in a nearby town. Jonathan's childhood had been marked by hardship. His father died suddenly when Jonathan was just 13. That loss scarred him deeply, leaving him reserved, cautious, and hesitant to let people in. He avoided conflict, kept to himself, and rarely expressed his emotions openly. But he loved soccer, and for a time, it was his only outlet for connecting with others. When Jonathan and Alexia crossed paths, their differences seemed to balance one another. She was confident and outgoing, while he was quiet and shy. Their relationship grew slowly, but seriously. By the early 2010s, they were inseparable. After years together, the couple married in July 2015, in a ceremony officiated by Alexia's mother. Friends and family celebrated their union with joy, and for many, it seemed like the perfect love story. From the outside, their marriage appeared stable. They renovated a house that had belonged to Alexia's grandparents, worked out together, and often ran in local races. They projected an image of health, teamwork, and love. But beneath the polished surface, their marriage carried silent struggles, most painfully, their difficulty conceiving a child. For Alexia, who longed to start a family, this was a source of deep frustration. For Jonathan, it became an unspoken weight tied to insecurity and shame. That unspoken tension would eventually become the fault line beneath their seemingly ordinary life. Saturday morning, October 28th, 2017. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves already turning. At around 9 a.m., Alexia slipped into her running clothes and set off for her usual jog through the wooded trails around Gray. Running was routine for her, both a hobby and part of her training for community races. Jonathan later claimed he stayed home for a while before heading to work at his IT job. Nothing, he said, seemed unusual, but by midday, worry began to set in. Alexia hadn't returned. Her jogs rarely lasted more than 90 minutes, and her absence stretched into hours. Jonathan began calling her cell phone. No answer. He tried the home line. Silence. By early afternoon, Jonathan reached out to his brother-in-law, Gregory, who was married to Alexia's sister. Together, they began to search along Alexia's regular jogging route. They drove country roads, stopped at trailheads, and scanned ditches and ravines. Nothing. Hospitals were called, emergency rooms checked. No trace of Alexia. As daylight faded, Desperation grew. Jonathan went to the local police to file a missing persons report, providing details of her clothing, her jogging habits, and the fact that she hadn't taken her ID or phone with her. That, investigators noted, was unusual. Alexia was never unreachable, never careless. At first, police considered a range of possibilities. Had Alexia fallen and injured herself? Had she been attacked? Could she have left voluntarily, even briefly? But those who knew her dismissed the last theory immediately. Alexia wasn't the type to vanish without a word. 2 days later, on October 30th, searchers stumbled upon a grim scene in a wooded area outside Gray. Beneath a crude covering of branches and leaves lay a body. The attempt to conceal it had been clumsy, hurried. Investigators quickly noticed burn marks on both the clothing and the skin. Someone had tried to set the body on fire, an unmistakable attempt to destroy evidence. Forensic analysis revealed blunt force trauma, bruises, and strangulation marks on the neck. This was no accident. It was a homicide. Soon, the body was confirmed to be Alexia Daval. She was only 29 years old. News of her death spread like wildfire through the small community. Gray had never seen violence like this. People whispered about a random predator in the woods. Was there a killer roaming their town? Women who had once jogged alone now refused to go out without company. Fear, suspicion, and rumor gripped the community. But one detail chilled investigators: the attempt to burn the body. That wasn't the work of a random attacker. It suggested calculation, intent, and a desperate effort to erase traces of the crime. In the days that followed, Alexia's family found themselves thrust into the national spotlight. At the center of it all was Jonathan. Cameras captured him standing alongside Isabel and Jean-Pierre, his in-laws, his face solemn, his words soft. At memorials and vigils, he spoke publicly about Alexia, calling her his oxygen, the love of his life. His grief seemed genuine, his composure almost remarkable. Tens of thousands gathered at a memorial march, walking silently with white flowers and photographs of Alexia. Jonathan walked at the front, hand in hand with her parents. To the public, Jonathan appeared, the picture of a devastated widower. A man shattered, but dignified, honoring his wife's memory. The media praised him, painting him as a figure of strength and sorrow. But behind the scenes, investigators were beginning to see cracks in the image. Standard procedure dictated that the spouse be carefully examined, and so Jonathan became the focus. At first, his story seemed consistent. Alexia left for her jog. He went to work. He even mentioned fixing a printer that day at the office. But then came the inconsistencies. Scratches were spotted on his neck and chest, bite marks on his arms. Jonathan brushed them off, saying he and Alexia had argued the night before, but that it had ended quickly. Investigators weren't convinced. The injuries suggested a violent struggle. Forensic teams searching the couple's home discovered that the bed sheets in their house matched the sheet used to wrap Alexia's body. Tire tracks near where the body was found matched Jonathan's work car. And GPS data placed his vehicle in the vicinity of the crime scene during the night she disappeared. Piece by piece, the polished image of the grieving husband began to crumble. Jonathan had initially denied being anywhere near the woods. But cell tower data and surveillance footage told a different story. His carefully rehearsed alibi was unraveling, and yet, in public, he continued to play the part of the mourning husband. In private, investigators were starting to see him as their prime suspect. With the net of evidence tightening, investigators decided it was time to confront Jonathan directly. At first, he clung to his story, insisting that he had been at work and knew nothing about what had happened to Alexia. But the scratches on his body, the GPS data, The matching tire tracks. These details painted a damning picture. Jonathan's credibility crumbled further when forensic experts confirmed that the sheet used to cover Alexia's body had come from their own home. This wasn't the work of a faceless predator. It suggested something chilling. The crime had begun inside the Daval household. Under pressure, Jonathan began to alter his story. In early interrogations, he denied everything. Later, when confronted with the evidence, he tried to shift suspicion elsewhere. In January 2018, he made a startling accusation. He claimed that his brother-in-law, Gregory, was responsible for Alexia's death. Even more shocking, he alleged that Alexia's parents and sister were part of a cover-up. Investigators were stunned. The accusations contradicted his earlier statements and made little sense. Not a shred of evidence pointed to Gregory or Alexia's family. Still, Jonathan pressed the story, attempting to redirect suspicion away from himself. For the Fouillot family, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with Jonathan at vigils, it was a betrayal too painful to describe. The man they had once welcomed as a son now tried to cast them as conspirators in their daughter's murder. But the truth was already catching up with him. Psychologists brought in to evaluate Jonathan described him as insecure, emotionally repressed, and prone to sudden outbursts when under pressure. On the surface, he was timid, even withdrawn. But behind closed doors, he was capable of explosive anger. Throughout 2018, this pattern played out in the investigation. Some days, Jonathan admitted involvement, acknowledging he had played a role in Alexia's death. Days later, he would retract it all, again accusing Gregory, or suggesting it had been an accident. For investigators, it became clear that Jonathan's shifting stories were a stalling tactic. He was buying time, muddying the waters, and hoping to cast enough doubt to escape conviction. But the forensic evidence spoke louder than his words. By late 2018, Jonathan's defenses collapsed. On November 23rd, he admitted for the first time to killing Alexia. According to his account, they had argued late on the night of October 27th. The fight, he said, started over intimacy and escalated into shouting, pushing, and finally violence. He confessed that he had strangled her with his bare hands. Yet even in this moment of truth, Jonathan minimized his actions. He framed it as a sudden loss of control, a tragic accident. Days later, he changed his story yet again, this time trying to place blame back on Gregory. But investigators had heard enough. On December 7, 2018, during a tense meeting with Alexia's mother, Jonathan was shown a photograph of his wife. At that moment, he broke down and admitted what Isabel already knew in her heart. He alone had taken Alexia's life. A turning point came in June 2019 when police conducted a crime scene reenactment. In the early hours of the morning, under conditions mirroring that October night, Jonathan retraced his steps. This time, he confessed in full detail. He admitted striking Alexia repeatedly, 5 to 10 blows to her face, before strangling her. Afterward, realizing what he had done, he transported her body to the woods, attempted to burn it, and tried to cover it with branches. The confession stripped away any illusion of an accident. This was not a momentary lapse. It was a series of deliberate actions, from assault to concealment, carried out methodically after the fact. New evaluations added further insight. Jonathan was diagnosed with a personality disorder marked by obsessive traits and a need for control. Specialists noted that he was emotionally dependent on his mother, struggled to make independent decisions, and often bottled up resentment until it erupted violently. Marital tensions had also reached a breaking point. Alexia longed for a child, but fertility struggles weighed heavily on the couple. In text messages, she accused Jonathan of avoiding the issue, of refusing to face reality. He, in turn, blamed her for being demanding. Their arguments over family planning became a recurring source of conflict, and for Jonathan, a constant reminder of his insecurities. These psychological and relational pressures painted a clearer picture of the storm brewing behind the facade of a perfect marriage. In November 2020, the trial of Jonathan Daval began. The world was watching. Even under pandemic restrictions, the courtroom brimmed with tension. 6 jurors, 5 women, and 1 man listened as prosecutors laid out the evidence. They presented the timeline, the forensic analysis, the GPS data, and Jonathan's many contradictory statements. They reminded the court of his shifting strategies: denial, false accusations, partial confessions, and finally, the reenactment that left little doubt. The defense tried to soften the narrative, portraying Jonathan as a fragile man pushed to the edge by marital stress. They argued the killing had not been premeditated, but was the tragic result of a heated argument. But the facts told a harsher truth. Jonathan had not only killed Alexia, he had tried to erase her, to burn her body, to mislead investigators, and to frame her own family. Witnesses described Alexia as energetic, determined, and deeply committed to building a future. Friends spoke of the contrast between her outgoing personality and Jonathan's silence, his reluctance to engage in conflict until it erupted in violence. When Alexia's parents took the stand, the pain was raw. Isabel demanded clarity, every detail, every motive. Jonathan, when pressed, finally admitted that he understood the deadly consequences of his hands around her neck. On November 21st, 2020, after days of testimony, the jury delivered its decision. Jonathan Daval was found guilty of murdering his wife. His sentence, 25 years in prison, with a minimum of 12.5 before eligibility for parole. The Fouillot family did not seek the harshest possible punishment. Instead, they wanted truth, accountability, and recognition of Alexia's suffering. Jonathan did not appeal. He was immediately transferred to prison to begin serving his sentence. Civil claims followed. Alexia's parents sought compensation for emotional suffering and financial loss. While their initial request was higher, the courts finalized the sum at €160,000 in 2022. In the years since, the Fouillot family has tried to move forward. They sold the cafe and the house linked to Alexia's memory, choosing instead to invest in new ventures and focus on their surviving daughter and grandchildren. But the wound remains. For them, justice was never about numbers. It was about acknowledgement. The murder of Alexia Daval did more than devastate a family. Tens of thousands had once walked silently through gray to honor her memory. Today, those marches stand as reminders that behind every statistic is a life, a woman who loved, who dreamed, and whose story should never have ended this way. If this case moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next true crime story we uncover. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.